Hello, boys and girls. This is Holland Chambers Biology bringing to you a giant lecture on macromolecules. So macro in Latin means giant. Molecules are tiny, and so therefore we're going to be putting together a bunch of tiny molecules in order to create a very large molecule that in turn helps to create your life. There are four major categories that we're going to talk about today. It is carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. So do me a favor, as you watch this video, please make sure to stop the video every now and then and copy down exactly what I am saying. Yes, you will need to memorize this entire chart. I promise you we will be going over and over again numerous times. But either make flashcards or a Quizlet or remake the chart and, as a blank document and see if you can just fill it in as you go. Whatever you need to do, please make sure to memorize this. Okay, so let's go and start off. Please go ahead and make a couple categories here. The first category is macromolecules. The second category is monomers. So you're going to make a big 4 square chart. We're going to start with 2 first, but go ahead and make big 4 squares. Monomers, the second category is polymers. So again, all the way down, we're going to have 4 separate categories here. The next column over you have is element and function. And then the last category is enzyme and indicator. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about carbohydrates first. So carbohydrates. What's an example of carbohydrates? Well, you tell me. Let's list them out. We have bread, pasta, potatoes, rice. Okay? So again, pretty much everything we eat is made of carbohydrates. Carbohydrates is made up of one, so mono means one. Okay? Mer is part. So the one part that makes up carbohydrates are sugars. Now specifically, we're going to call these sugars saccharides. Okay? So because I'm dealing with one sugar, I'm going to call this a monosaccharide. So S-A-C-C-H-A-R-I-D-E. So monosaccharide. Okay? Now, an example of a couple monosaccharides include glucose, also fructose, and galactose. Okay, so glucose is a sugar that we find in fruit. Fructose or fructose is the sugar that you find in honey. Okay. And then galactose is a sugar that we actually find in milk. So this is one molecule of sugar. Now what happens when we put 2 molecules of sugar together? So for example, glucose plus fructose. So if we add a fruit and a honey sugar, it ends up creating sucrose. Okay? And so this is actually known as disaccharides. Disaccharides mean 2 sugars. Alright, so if we do glucose plus fructose, it actually ends up creating a substance called sucrose. If you do, say, glucose plus galactose, that ends up creating lactose, which again is another sugar in milk. And then you also can do 2 glucoses together, which ends up creating maltose, which is a sugar that you use for malt shakes. So that's that, that malt flavor that you get from those types of shakes. Now, the cool thing about sugars is that they have a kind of ringed shape to them. All right, it looks kind of like this, like almost like a hexagon. Okay, why is that? Well, their elements. So let's go over one more here. Okay, their elements is CHO, so C-H and O. So every single sugar, whether it's fructose or glucose or galactose, they are made of a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Okay, so for carbohydrates, I want you guys to write down CHO 1 to 2 to 1. Okay, now when we take these single sugars, whether it's a monosaccharide or disaccharide, and we put them together in a big group, that group is now called a polymer. Okay, so poly means many. So we're going to put together a bunch of circles up here on the top, which in turn creates that polysaccharide, right? Many sugars. So polysaccharides include, well, let's go and write that word down. So polysaccharide, many sugars, okay? So when we put together a bunch of sugars together, we can end up creating starch. We also can end up creating cellulose. So starch and cellulose are from plants. The starch is the storage of the sugar inside plants, like potatoes is filled with a bunch of starch, right? Cellulose is the plant fiber, so you can think of celery, right? It's a fiber that's undigestible. You also have the polysaccharide glycogen, which is the sugar found in your liver. And yes, you guys will need to know these. Okay, so again, starch, cellulose are plant sugars. Glycogen is a polysaccharide found in the human liver. And last but not least, we have is pectin, which is found in grains. And then you have chitin, which is the polysaccharide, interestingly enough, that makes the exoskeleton of arthropods. Okay, so your shrimp, your lobsters, things like that. So this is the exoskeleton. Okay, now elements and function. Why do you guys eat sugar to begin with? Why do you eat pasta before a game? What does it do for you? Why does the coach tell you to do that? Well, carbohydrates give you guys quick energy. Okay, so go ahead and write that down. So quick energy. Now, why do I say quick energy? Well, because carbohydrates only give you guys 30 minutes of energy. Okay, so 30 minutes of energy. What happens if you were to eat a big bowl of lasagna plus some bread and maybe some raviolis on the side, okay? And you decide to sit down and watch all extended versions of, say, Lord of the Rings, right? Just back to back to back. You're just eating away all this carbohydrates. And you don't use that energy. You don't get up and go work out. You don't go running. You're not using it. You're just sitting there. Well, what happens to it? Well, it gets put into your fat, okay? So if you don't use the carbohydrates, it's going to transition into storage within your fat cells, okay? So quick energy plus storage. All right. Last but not least are the indicators for carbohydrates. Now, if we were to pour iodine on a piece of, say, cracker, okay, it's going to turn black. And I will be doing a food demo for you guys on this, so you will kind of see this. If I were to pour Benedict's on that same cracker, heat it up with some hot water, and I'm looking for sugars within that cracker, it's going to turn orange. So we have these indicators that help us understand what's in this food if we're not really sure what the ingredients are, okay? So go ahead and write down over here on the side, iodine equals black. It is an indicator for carbohydrates, so large polysaccharides. Whereas if we want to test for monosaccharides, we're going to use a different indicator. That's going to be Benedict's. Okay, so Benedict's equals orange, and we're going to test for simple sugars. Okay, now last but not least is that when you guys go to eat that lasagna and those raviolis and those, garlic bread, the first thing that happens when you take a bite, not only do you produce all this saliva, but within that saliva we have enzymes. Okay, there's a specific enzyme that I need for you guys to memorize that's known as amylase. So amylase. Okay, so amylase immediately starts to break down carbohydrates. Okay, and that's important because by the time you chew that lasagna and it goes down your throat in your belly, you want it to break down into simple sugars so we can use that energy more efficiently and effectively. Okay, so over here on the side where it says enzymes, I want you guys to write amylase. Okay, is our enzyme that's within our saliva. Okay, so amylase, parentheses, saliva. All right, guys, so round 2. We're going to be focusing on lipids, okay? So your next category right over here, I would like for you guys to write down the word lipid. Now, lipid is very similar to carbohydrates because they do have the same elements. They are made of CHO, C, H, and O. However, how they're put together and what they do is a little bit different, all right? So what would be an example of a lipid? AK, what would be an example of a fat? You tell me. Wait, what was that? Yeah, that's right. Good job, guys. So oils, waxes, okay, butter. Nice job. Okay, and what's really interesting that a lot of us don't really realize is steroids. Steroid is a type of fat. Steroid is a type of lipid. All right, so I want you guys to put a big star next to that one, steroids. Okay, now lipids, just a little fun chemistry for you, are considered nonpolar, which means that they do not dissolve in water. And so it's really hard for these guys to mix with anything else. So a lot of times you just find them by themselves, all right? So insoluble in water. Now, the monomer. So what's the single molecule that makes up a lipid? Again, a little confusing here, but bear with me, okay? The single molecule that makes up a lipid is known as a triglyceride. Okay? Tri means 3, glyceride means glycerol. And so what happens is that we're going to take one glycerol, which is a giant molecule, looks like a big rectangle, and we're going to put together 3 fatty acids. Okay, so I want you guys to write that down. This is 1 glycerol plus 3 fatty acids. All right, so that's the single molecule that makes up lipids. Now, when you put together a bunch of triglycerides, we end up creating saturated or unsaturated fats. All right, so here's my single molecule, again, my square with my 3 legs, and when I put together this square with its 3 legs, it almost looks like a sideways centipede, okay? Now, the polymer of lipids is, number 1, saturated fats, and then number 2 is unsaturated fats. Okay, again, you will need to know these different characteristics. First one, saturated fats have a single carbon bond. Okay, as in the molecules, carbon is singly bonded to another molecule. So they're only sharing 1 electron. These are animal fats, and they tend to stay solid at room temperature. Okay, now these are your bad fats. So these are your animal fats, so these are bad. So think about when you guys are eating Oreos. Okay, Oreos are the yummy chocolate like cracker cookie thing put together with lard, which is pig fat and sugar, and we eat it and we think it's amazing, right? Well, again, it's really hard to burn that off. So even though it's a single carbon bond, your body takes a lot more energy to burn off those Oreos than it does if you guys were to eat, say, an avocado. An avocado has a different molecular composition. Even though it's a fat, it's a lot easier for our body to use and remake into something that we can actually use. Our organs, our cells, all of that, okay? All right, so unsaturated, these are the good guys. So happy phase, right? Happy phase. These are a double, so DB, carbon bond. They are plant fats. And these tend to stay liquid at room temperature. Okay, why is that? Well, the triglyceride that these lipids are made up of, the very last chain is bent. And so because that last chain is bent, they can't actually connect with each other, which is why it remains at a liquid form. And again, unsat. Think of you're on a Saturday, you're watching TV, you unsat yourself, you went for a walk. If you guys go for a walk, you're outside. Outside, there tends to be lots of plants, right? And that's a good environment for you. So unsaturated fats are plants. It's good for you, okay? They stay liquid at room temperature, and these are the fats that your body wants to reuse and remake into healthy cells and organs and tissues and whatnot, okay? Saturated fats, okay, you sat on your butt all weekend, you didn't do anything, ate Oreos. Those fats are a lot harder to break, and those tend to go right into storage and cause you to be obese, have heart disease, diabetes, a whole bunch of stuff, okay? Now, their element, by the way, is also CHO. So just like carbohydrates, C, H, and O. But they do not have a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. Instead, they have a random number. So for example, a sugar up here, glucose, would be C6H12O6, right? 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. But a lipid, on the other hand, would be like C5H12O52, right? Something like that. That's just an example, okay? And that, it's completely random. There is no ratio in that. So if I were to give you guys a molecule and you have to look at it, you would count through the carbons, the hydrogens, and the oxygens, and you would say, whoa, wait a minute, this has a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. I am physically looking at a molecule of carbohydrate. If you count the carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, you realize, whoa, this is totally random, there is no ratio, then you would be looking at a lipid, okay? Last but not least is how do you indicate for lipids? So show of hands, how many of you guys go to In-N-Out, right? How many of you guys get the french fries? And how many of you guys end up with oil on your hands after you eat the french fries? Well, In-N-Out puts their french fries in paper bags, right? And so oil, because it's a chain, a triglyceride, it wiggles its way through the fibers of the paper, which is why you end up with oil on your hands, okay? And that's actually an indicator for oils or lipids in your food, okay? So paper bag, and it turns either clear or we call it translucent, okay? So clear, translucent, opaque. Now the enzyme that your body uses to help break down these lipids is known as lipase. So think of lipids, and the key word for enzymes is ACE, so just put it together, lipase. Okay, and again, this enzyme tends to be within your stomach to help break down those fats into usable energy. Okay, so let's take a step back. All right, elements is CHO, but it's random. We know that lipase is the enzyme that's going to break down our fats to make energy. But here's the key, how much, right? So if you know that carbohydrates give you guys 30 minutes of energy, well, how many of you, especially runners out there, how many of you guys have been running for 30 minutes and all of a sudden you get super tired, right? Or you've been surfing for 30 minutes and all of a sudden you kind of hit that wall where you're just like, man, I think I'm just going to go in. Or you're, whatever it is you're doing, soccer, tennis, you guys always hit that wall, right? But if you get through that wall, just a few minutes, just keep paddling, keep running, keep doing that tennis, right? All of a sudden you get this burst of energy. Runners out there, you guys know what I'm talking about. This is known as the runner's high. Guys, you don't need to do drugs to get high. You just gotta eat fat, right? And so this second burst of energy provides for you twice the amount of energy that carbohydrates gives, and it can last a lot longer. So this runner's high, this burst of energy from fat can last for almost like an hour or two, okay? So here's the key. Again, quiz question for you. If you are working out, how long do you need to work out to start to lose weight, right? The answer is at least 45 minutes. So the first 30 minutes, you guys are burning carbohydrates, and then the next 15 minutes, you start to burn fat. So try to work out for at least 45 minutes to an hour so you're actually burning that fat and you're gaining that bunch of energy, which is why after you work out or go skateboarding or play tennis or surfing, you tend to have a lot more energy, okay? So element and function, CHO, random, and then of course make sure you guys provide 2 times the amount of energy if used, okay? Again, if you guys are gonna sit there and eat, you know, a bunch of ding-dongs that have a bunch of fat in it and you don't do anything with it, then of course it's gonna go into long-term storage within your fat cells. So if you don't use that 2 times energy, make sure also to write in here storage, okay? All right, here we go, guys, round 3. All right, so far we've talked about carbohydrates, we talked about lipids, and now we're going to talk about proteins. Keep in mind these are macromolecules, which is a type of organic chemistry. So all of these molecules that I've been talking to you guys about today, proteins, carbohydrates, lipids, and eventually nucleic acids, these are all molecules that are made of carbon, okay? So carbohydrates, CHO, 1 to 2 to 1. Lipids, CHO, a random. Now we're going to look at proteins. He is also CHO, but we're going to add in a little bit of nitrogen, so he becomes CHON, all right? So let's go to think about what are things that we eat that we know of that's made of proteins. Write some down. What was that? Of course, steak, right? We've got steak, chicken. I think I heard somebody say fish. Okay, bones, muscles, and what we always tend to forget are hormones and enzymes. So within your body, your brain communicates to the rest of your body through hormones, and we're able to break down these products that we're eating through enzymes, okay, or with enzymes. So hormones and enzymes, okay. So we just said that the element of proteins is CHON, okay, so C-H-O-N. So head on over here to this column here and write down C-H-O-N. Now there is no random, ratio or anything like that. It's just as long as it has carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, then that is a protein. If it has anything else or less, then it's going to be something different. All right. So let's head on back to the monomer. So what is the monomer of a protein? Remember, mono means one, so it's the one puzzle piece that we need to put together in order to create a protein. And that is an amino acid. Okay, now you guys actually have 20 essential amino acids. So I'm sure you guys have heard of, protein bars or, protein shakes that advertise, hey, we got 20 amino acids. Well, that's good. That means that you are actually getting all of the protein that you need for your body to repair and heal and build, okay? Now, within the proteins, I want you guys to understand that these proteins kind of look like a plus sign, okay? One side of the amino acid is known as the amino group, okay, because it has some nitrogen and hydrogen in it. And I'll provide you guys a better picture with this, okay? You also have a random hydrogen ion up here on the top. Carbon is in the center of this entire molecule, kind of connecting everything together. And then you also have a carboxyl group off here to the side. And then you have this R factor, which is where we hook up with all the other molecules. Okay, so that's the place where the molecule attaches, all right, to other things. It can be other elements, all right? So when we put together this simple amino acid as a group, it becomes known as a polymer. Okay, so we're going to put together a bunch of bunch of plus signs together. Now, in order to connect these plus signs together, I'm going to need a very strong bond. Now, here's the deal, guys. If you're running from a bear, you don't want your muscles to actually fall off your bones, right? You don't want your heart to just disintegrate if you're trying to swim away from a shark, right? You want it to stay strong. You want your muscles to be intact. And so, therefore, proteins are held together by one of the strongest bonds that we know of, which is known as a peptide bond, okay? So in between every amino acid, I want you guys to write down, is a peptide bond. Now, because these amino acids are held together by peptide bonds, this polymer is known as a many peptide chain, okay? So that's what we call it. So polypeptide chain, okay? Now, what do we use proteins for? There's a whole slew, there's a list of just a billion things that we use proteins for, but I just want to at least emphasize a few of these, all right? So, element is CHON, and we're going to use proteins for things like storage, such as, say, seeds, right? The seed's a protein. Also transport. So your blood is a protein, helps to transport nutrients and water. You also have your muscles, right? There's these things called apoptosis, which is cell explosion. So your cells will actually commit suicide. They'll pop themselves and destroy themselves if there's an invader coming in. And proteins are responsible for that. So it helps to save the rest of your body by destroying this one infected cell. Okay. We also have the building blocks. Okay, so proteins are considered the building blocks of life. And of course you have, most importantly, hormones and enzymes. Okay, so hormones and enzymes, which are regulators in our body. Okay, last but not least is antibodies. Okay, so antibodies actually help to fight invaders like viruses and bacteria to help keep your body at a homeostasis, which is to maintain equilibrium and a state of health. Okay, now last but not least are indicators and enzymes. So how do we know if a substance or a meal has protein in it? Well, we're going to use this cool blue indicator that's known as burettes. Okay, so because protein starts with a P, the same is going to be with the color. So the color P, purple, right? So P protein, P purple. So if our substance turns purple, when you add burettes to it, that means that yes, there's actually some type of protein within that substance, okay? Now, in order to break down proteins within your body, we have specific enzymes to help do that. Now, there's two enzymes I would like for you guys to know. The first one is pepsin, and the second one is trypsin. Okay, so pepsin and trypsin are responsible for breaking down that In-N-Out cheeseburger once it gets to your stomach, and then we'll rip it apart from a polypeptide chain into an amino acid, and then those amino acids from the cow, right? So we're starting with a polypeptide protein from a cow. We're going to rip it apart into its essential monomers, the amino acids, and then we're going to re-put those amino acids back together to create your human proteins as far as what it is that you need. So do you need more muscles? Do you need more brain cells? Do you need more hair? What do you need, right? And so the story is you are what you eat. This is why, guys, your body breaks down exactly what you eat into things that it can actually rebuild your cells with. So if you guys are eating nothing but, say, ding-dongs and Pop-Tarts and, Twinkies and Doritos, okay? There's no like normal ingredients in that stuff. It's all man-made chemicals, who knows what it is. And so when your body tries to break it down and rebuild your cells, because guess what? These 4 macromolecules are exactly what your cells are made up of. Your cells are made up of carbs, proteins, lipids, and inside every cell is a DNA, which is a nucleic acid. So are you what you eat? Absolutely, okay? So Doritos, all of that, we don't know what it is, so it gets stored, okay, in your body, and we can't use it. And so that's where a bunch of fat comes into play. That's where a bunch of dis-ease comes in. Okay, your body's at dis-ease because we don't know what to do with this stuff. And so please, if anything, please, from this lecture, start to look at the ingredients of the food that you eat. Do you recognize what it means? Do you recognize what it says? If you don't, then you might be eating something that you cannot reform into normal cells. All right, guys, here we go. Last round, here we go. Last macromolecule is nucleic acids. Now keep in mind, we've gone through the entire organic chemistry lineup of macromolecules. Organic chemistry meaning that they contain carbon. Macromolecules means that they are large. And so the 4 major macromolecules within organic chemistry is carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and voila, nucleic acids, okay? Go ahead and write down our examples, DNA, RNA, and ATP. So, you might have heard of DNA before, you recognize its name, but you might not have known its official name. So it is deoxyribonucleic acid, hence the word nucleic acid. RNA, anyone know what RNA is? What was that? That's right, ribonucleic acid. So it's actually half of the DNA versus an entire twisted ladder. So instead of 2 strands coming together, RNA is just 1. And then we also have ATP. ATP is an energy molecule that we're going to really get to know during photosynthesis. His name is adenosine triphosphate, and he is just simply the monomer that puts together the RNA and the DNA. So kind of cool. So what does he actually look like? Now, nucleic acids, I want you guys to remember nuke to nuke, okay? So nucleic acids are made up of the monomer nucleotide, okay? So the monomer nucleotide. He has 2 nitrogen bases on one side attached to a 5-carbon sugar in the middle. And then off to the other side we have a phosphate, which is actually PO3, okay? So keep in mind, nitrogen is N, sugar is CHO, right? 1:2:1 ratio, plus we have our phosphate in there. And so the elements for nucleic acids would be CHOPN, CHOPN. Okay, so think of CHOPN. So CHOPN, carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, CHOPN, and then the last but not least, CHOPN, okay? Now, what does the polymer of nucleic acids look like? Well, if the monomer is a nucleotide, we're going to put together many nucleotides into a single chain. That would be RNA. So that is the polymer, all right? If we take this single nucleotide and put it into 2 chains and wrap them as a double helix, now we're looking at DNA, all right? Last but not least is ATP. ATP is made up of our nitrogen base, our sugar, and then our phosphate. But that's actually known as AMP, monophosphate. ATP is adenosine triphosphate. So we're actually going to add 2 more phosphates here on the side to create a 3-phosphate chain, ATP, okay? And so that is the polymer. So this one's pretty easy. Now, what's the function? Why do we need nucleic acids? Why do you need DNA? Why do you need energy, right? Well, number one, DNA and even RNA, depending on if you're a virus as well, is your genetic code. Okay, this is our blueprint for life. You also have number two, specifically RNA. RNA is responsible largely for building the proteins in your body, building the muscles and the brain and the neurons and everything in your body. Okay, so it is the protein formation. So we're going to have a whole unit on what we call protein synthesis. Okay, last but not least, ATP is energy. Okay, so by breaking off one of these phosphates, it actually gives you the energy you need to survive, okay, to live. So if we don't have ATP, then we're pretty much dead, okay? So you need all of this in order to survive, okay? Enzymes and indicators, well, as long as you're alive, you have DNA. So we don't need to, indicate or have enzymes or anything like that. So this here is our 8 characteristics of life. And I have a whole lecture on just that. So what are the characteristics of life? And as long as you have all 8 of those, then you most likely will have DNA, which means that you're most likely alive, and check, you have a new. Long story short, what would be a way for us to remember this order of elements and this order of energy production and being able to use everything? Hope this was entertaining and hope this was helpful. This is Holden Chambers Biology. Checking out.